I hope everyone is doing well in the midst of this self-quarantine that we're trying to hold to. Please keep in mind that if you need anything, your church family is here to help. We want to know if there's something we can do for you or something you need prayer for or errands you need run that you can't get out and do your own. Please let us know because that's what a family is for. Now, I hope you've already read the passage that we're studying for today. Psalm 91 is a beautiful, beautiful passage that assures us that God is protecting us not just from the coronavirus, but from many dangers in the world. And we can trust that He's going to provide for us. However, if you're reading this with a little bit more critical eye, you may realize a problem. And that is that these promises written here about how God will protect His people from these dread diseases and from the persecution of evil people, this doesn't always hold true. The fact is, God's people still get sick and die and suffer in many ways. In fact, even the Bible itself acknowledges that this is not always true. In Ecclesiastes 7:15, Solomon writes, "In this meaningless life of mine I have seen both of these, the righteous perishing in their righteousness, and the wicked living long in their wickedness." How do we reconcile these things? Well, we have to be able to read the scripture within its literary genre. You see, different parts of the Bible are written in different genres for different reasons. History is written to be read as history. Epistles are written to be read as letters and wisdom literature. And much of Proverbs and Psalms especially is written as observations of the world and how God works in it. So then when we read these things, we should not read them as promises that will apply in every single situation. Rather, we should read them as principles of the world and principles that God has enacted. I think you could call what we're actually going through right now a crisis. And the interesting thing about crisis is that there's actually a lot of potential in it. You see, the root of part of the word of crisis, the Greek kri, literally means to sift or to sieve. It's as if you're searching for gold in a stream and you're sifting sand through your tools to try and find the evidence of gold nuggets. Or as if you're sifting wheat and you're trying to get the chaff out so that you have only the good stuff. A crisis does just that. It shakes up our world so that we see what is real and what is worthwhile and what is only pretension. This makes me think of the Apostle Peter. Right before Jesus was arrested, Peter had boldly proclaimed at the Last Supper that he was going to be faithful to Christ and that although everyone else might abandon him, Peter would never leave Jesus. Well, just a few hours later, we saw that that was not true. When crisis hit, Peter's world was shaken up, and some of the less flattering traits that were underneath came to the surface. So as we're going through this today, I want you to keep in mind this question: what is this crisis revealing about you? Is it showing that you have a desire to serve? Is it showing that you have a love and a devotion and a trust in God? Or is it showing that you have great fear, that you trust in your own means? Both Psalm 91 and what we're going through makes me think of actually an early victory of Christians. In the year 250 AD, a terrible plague broke out in the Roman Empire, a plague that we now call the Cyprian plague. Many believe it was smallpox or something very similar to it. But this was much worse than anything that COVID-19 has thrown at us. One historian estimated that 30% of the Roman population died in this plague. But the worst part of it was perhaps the fear and the panic that it created in the people. You see, as their world was shaken, as they were sifted, what was underneath really came to show. Let me read you something by a Christian bishop named Dionysius who lived at this time. He wrote this about this plague and how the pagan world responded to it. They created such a panic. At the first onset of disease, they pushed the suffering away and fled from their dearest, throwing them out into the road, treating unburied corpses as dirt, hoping to avoid the spread of the dread diseases. Now today, if you walk down the street and saw a young child who was sick, knocking on the door of his parents' house, begging them to let him come in, you might be appalled, but it seems this might not have been so uncommon a sight back then. And so in the midst of all of this, what were the Christians doing? The Christians were the ones that were taking in the plague victims that had been thrown out on the street, and they were taking care of them and nursing them. And if you're like me, the warning bells go off at that point because you think, well, then they'll get sick too. And well, yes, many of them did get sick and many of them did die. That is the reality of this world. But the principle of God's protection remained true. You see, it seemed that Christians had a remarkable resistance to this plague. And I think that's for two reasons. First, when a Christian became sick, he had his brothers and sisters to take care of him. And second, I do think there was a supernatural element to this. God was protecting his people. And so the result is that the courage and confidence that the Christians had made an enormous difference and made an incredible testimony for Christ. I told you that one historian estimated about 30% of the Roman population died from the plague. That same historian estimated that in communities with a strong Christian presence, only 10% actually died. Many lives were saved because of the courage and peace and confidence and love that comes from trusting in a God who wants to take care of us. That is what a strong faith will do. And so as you are studying Psalm 91 today, I do want you to keep in mind the context that is set up in verse 1. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High. Dwells implies remaining or be at home in. It's someone who's frequently there. It's not referring to someone who just runs there when things get bad and then immediately leaves after. There is very little confidence and peace in that situation. And so as we read through this, keep in mind that the greatest confidence and trust in God comes from a relationship, not a spur-of-the-moment decision, but from work over time that invests into knowing and trusting that God knows us, that he loves us, and that he provides for us. And that's what this psalm is about, giving us confidence in those very things.